Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors here at Convey Church, and I'm here with my buddy, my pal, my pastor, and my partner in crime. What's up, Pastor Jon?
Hey, dude. How's it going?
Oh, pretty good.
It's Monday.
Yes, it's the Monday after I preached yesterday, so I'm got the post-Monday, the post-preaching Mondays, which is always just an interesting feeling. It's just like, oh, you got all this effort towards something, and now you're done.
Yeah, and exhausted, right?
Yeah, I've gotten a second win, but this morning I was like, oh man, I am really feeling exhausted. I did 28 Exodus 28 yesterday, and it was pretty. We'll talk about that next episode, but there's a lot of words in that chapter.
There is a lot of words in that chapter, that's for sure. Yeah, it's a lengthy one, and it's all the weird thing about these lengthy chapters in Exodus is it's like words you don't typically use, like filigree and ephod and calyxes and you're like tenants. Yeah, and the way it says it, it'll say the same thing 3 times with the words. Yeah. And you're just not used to saying those words or reading those words. And I know actually on the sermon we're talking about, I skipped an entire section of scripture reading it at the 11:10 because I've got my new Bible that I'm using, and the way it's laid out on the page, I just missed it. And
funny.
Yeah, it's just, so many words.
Yeah, I was fumbling over some of the words yesterday, which I feel like it's not my usual.
My new Coram Deo swag.
New hoodie. Right on.
I did. I bought the new hoodie for Fall Festival, and it came the day after Fall Festival.
Oh, fun. Timing.
Yeah, perfect.
All right,
timing.
So let's talk about Exodus 27. We're looking at there's a lot of specific instruction continuing for the Tabernacle, which is I think we talked about on the previous episode as being like God's mobile, his RV, his mobile home for his people as they're traveling. He goes with them. It's a little mobile Sinai. Yep. And we've so far we've walked through the holy places. The Holy of Holies, the curtain, the holy places, and all the stuff that's in there. And then we've talked about curtains for the whole assembly. And now we're talking about the court, and specifically things that are in the court, things like the altar, things like I think the oil is one of the things. What was the other thing? The altar.
Well, there's a wash basin, but that comes later.
That's right.
Yeah, that's in the court.
So the court, the altar, and the oil, I think were your 3 points.
Yeah,
because I know that because you just reminded me of that. So let's first question here.
Yeah.
What is the court? What is this this part of the tabernacle, and what purpose does it serve?
Yeah. So the actual the holy place and the most holy place are a tented in space that exists inside the court. So when you're talking about the tabernacle, you're really talking about the whole thing. Yep. But there's the internal tent, which is completely covered, like the roof. It's a cube, 15 feet wide by 45 feet long. So 3-to-1, which is an interesting ratio. And then around that space is a 7.5 foot tall curtain that is 100 feet long on the north side, 100 feet long on the south side, and then 70. Let me look at my thing here. Remember, 75 feet. Is that right? Yeah. Sorry, I've got the graphic. I have to draw this stuff out. So 75 feet on the west and 75 feet on the east, and so that together is like the tabernacle area, and the court is a space of general assembly. And then the holy place and the most holy are a unique assembly. Only the priest can go to the holy place. Only the high priest can go into the most holy once a year on the Day of Atonement or a Yom Kippur. So the court is that general gathering space that surrounds the temple, but there's a clear demarcation between the common space where all the 12 tribes are assembled around to the north, the south, east, and the west. There's a clear demarcation. It's almost like when you have a yard, you have a fence, and then inside the fence you have a house. That's very much what it's like. You have a fence that says here's the property line, and then the tabernacle in terms of the holy and the most holy place would be like the house inside.
Got it. So
That's
the
how
court
it's arranged.
so the court you called it a place of general assembly, meaning this is a place. I believe I can't recall. I think only the high priest can go into the holy place and the holy of holies, right? Can the high priest or can the other priests go into the holy place?
I believe that the priest can go into the holy place, but only the high priest can go into the most holy place, or the holy of holies. I'm pretty sure that's the way. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works, because it would be the regular priest that would tend to the bread and also to the lampstand, which are located in the holy place.
Got it. And so you have this outer court area, which is where God's people are allowed to go as well, right? Yeah. They're allowed to be in proximity, so long as they are not unclean, right?
Correct.
That's the primary distinguishing factor, whether or not they're allowed into the outer court. So you do see later in Leviticus
ceremonially unclean and unclean.
Yeah, ceremonially unclean and unclean. And you see a lot of instruction in Leviticus, about uncleanness, right? You're unclean if you touch a dead body. You're unclean if women are unclean if they're menstruating. You have all these different unclean activities, and it's not, the point there isn't that these things are sinful. They make you ceremonially unclean for this ceremony that takes place in the tabernacle. And so you have this place where you don't have to be a priest proper, as it were, to enter.
Correct.
Right. I kind of wonder if when God tells the people that they're going to be a royal priesthood, right, a kingdom of priests, if there isn't some indication that they are as a people ceremonially clean for the purpose of a kind of general priesthood that is not the same thing as the sacramental priesthood. But you have this. They can go in, and they are to go in. And they're to go in, and what are they doing in the outer court exactly?
They're bringing sacrifices. This is worship. These are sacrifices for sin. These are Thanksgiving sacrifices, burnt offerings. So you're essentially approaching God, and you're bringing a sacrifice to cover sin, or you're bringing a sacrifice in gratitude. Those are the two main things that are happening.
Gotcha. And there's a kind of I guess theology that's being communicated by these spaces as well.
Absolutely.
And some of those things are directly connected to some of the furniture. But maybe before we get into the furniture, like the altar, we could talk a little bit about, or you could, share what you think about the theology of the spaces, because there is a kind of, I think that there's something going on even with the color on the outside, and then the inner tabernacle, the inner tents being a color and fabric as well. Yeah. What's going on there?
Yeah. Well, I think like you have to understand when you're reading it, and even like when you read it on Sunday, there's this temptation to ask yourself, why all these details?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because it's like, I mean, the clasp for the ephod, and really, did Moses really need to know all this stuff? But when you ask that question, you're feeling that you're missing so much of what's happening. Like every detail in the construction of this area is meant to communicate something. It's meant to reflect a reality. And that's why Moses has to ensure that it's constructed a particular way, because it's meant to communicate or relay a particular message. And so you have to understand that going in, or else you're just going to kind of get bored, and you're not going to do the work of like asking the questions. Well, why this? Like, you have curtains, but there's different colors of curtains, and they're in different locations. And there's certain curtains that have a particular color, which turns out to be the priestly color of blue and scarlet. And it's purple as well. And that gets repeated. That phrase is repeated throughout this section of blue, purple, scarlet yarn, fine woven linen. Why is that? And even with the outer court, so you have fine linen that forms the outer court for the most part, but there is it's a 30-foot section, I believe it is, on the eastern side that is a completely different color, and it's the same color as the holy place. And so all of those things are important. They're all meant to communicate. And so you have to be curious enough to go, why are these colors? What do they mean? And when you do a little bit of that nerdy work, everything really starts, and then you start getting excited, because then you realize, oh, in every single detail, there's a little sermon. There's something here. There's a reason why God has it this way. And it's really quite important. So, when we went through it on Sunday, I talked through the items not in the order that they're listed in the text, but in the order that you would see them if you were walking towards it. And the thing that would immediately stand out would be, you've got an eastern gate that's one color, one section of it is one color, but the rest of the stuff is white. So you have this massive perimeter, marked off in white. God could have asked it to be any color he wanted, right? Yeah. But it's just plain linen. It's just this kind of off-white color. And then within that, those are 7.5 feet tall. Well, the Holy of Holy space is 15 feet tall. So you would see that holy place protruding above the white barrier. And you would also see potentially smoke coming up from the altar. You might see fire from the altar. And when you understand that the tabernacle is basically a mobile Sinai. Sinai is where God comes down to meet with Moses and the people. The temple is where that is going to be repeated over and over again. You start to see that the way it's constructed is actually to visually represent Sinai. So you've got white curtains around that represent the cloud of smoke that was on the top of the mountain when Moses went up, and no one else could go up, but Moses goes up. And it's described as lightning and thunders and smoke and flashes. And so every time you would approach that area, you were approaching Sinai. You were approaching the place that God came down to make covenant, to be with his people, to talk to Moses. And that was represented by the clouds and the curtain, the white linen curtains, and then the protruding structure and the smoke, right? And so that's why those colors really matter. They're meant to tell a story. They're meant to remind people of their history. Just like in the annual celebration of the Passover, right? It looks back to the Exodus out of Egypt and the lamb that was slain and the blood that was shed. Well, in a very similar way, like every time you would see the temple area, it would remind you of the Sinai experience and the covenant that God had made with his people.
Yeah, there's one of the things I think there's some relation. I mentioned this yesterday, between the outfit, obviously, of the priest and the construction of the tabernacle. There's a lot of the same material, even layers of linen, layers of the same yarn, and purple, scarlet, blue yarn, and gold.
Yeah, and needlework.
And one of the things, it's funny. I was reading Jeremiah today, and one of the things that I read this section. I think it's Jeremiah 12, maybe. And it's the section where Jeremiah is told by God to go and get a finely twined linen undergarment, or a loincloth. Okay, and he's supposed to go take that linen, and he's supposed to bury it next to the Euphrates, and then he's supposed to dig it up later, and he finds that the linen's completely spoiled, right? And God tells him, this is what has happened to Judah. Judah has become an utterly spoiled linen cloth, and that was somewhat confirming to one of my ideas, which is I think that linen, the fine linen, is a kind of representation of moral purity, as well as you mentioned the glory cloud. I think that there's a kind of think about the glory cloud, and the people can't come near it, right? Because they're not morally pure. Yeah. And there's a kind of representation there. And I think, I can't remember where I heard it, but it's probably James Jordan. But somebody had mentioned, there's an interesting progression with how you would experience the items in the tabernacle, and how they do relate to how we think about like a covenant renewal worship service. Like you come to the gate, it's like call to worship. The gate tells you, even the fact you go through a kind of curtain that is the color of the priesthood means you can only come in through the priesthood, right? Like,
yes.
And then but everything around this place is this white linen, and this white linen, it's kind of like, the first thing we do after the call to worship is this confession of sin, and this receiving the absolution, right? Like, in Christ, your sins are forgiven you. There's a cleansing there, and then everything in the court talks about cleansing, right? You have the sacrifices given, but you also have the basin, which isn't actually in this section. I don't know.
No, not yet.
Okay. So you have the basin, which is like where you get washed up, you get cleansed. And then there's the Holy of Holies, which is this priestly zone of, where the priest, goes into God's house, as it were. And there's I don't know. When I think about the priest, I think about the priest is, these two roles of representing God and also representing the people. And so as he goes into the holy place, he's like allowed to go into, what I think that first section, the holy place is like a picture of this glorified holy earth. You have, and then the Holy of Holies is this place where heaven meets earth. It's like they're connected. Yeah. So I mean, that's in my mind. But and so when we go into the worship service, one of the things we talk about, I think we've talked about this in the past. Like, it's as though God's people are entering the heavens, right? Yeah. When we go to worship service, right, where we're washed and we go through the step of confessing sins, and as we are singing together and hearing from God's word, it's as though we're entering the heavenlies where Christ, our priest, feeds us, right? And and then he sends us out. It's like this place where heaven meets earth. And so that I find that, I think that it was James Jordan who kind of gave that, like, the order of these things is important. The first thing that has to be traversed is you enter the place where sins are addressed through cleansing. Yeah. Right. Yep. And then your priest receives you, brings you into these holy places. Right. So very, very, just an interesting, like, it's like architectural, like, theology.
Yeah. I think yesterday you talked about, like, it's a play, it's an act that you're watching that is telling a story, and that's true. And all the different pieces, actually the architecture is meant to tell a story as well. And it leans heavily on what has happened previously in terms of redemptive history, going all the way back to Eden. And you really have to, as much as you can, like, immerse your mind in the biblical world from Exodus before, to start seeing, like, how these specific architectural elements are clues. And I don't mean clues like little things like hidden, like it's supposed to be hidden, but like they actually tell us what this is. So, for example, like the purple, right? When you're reading purple and blue and scarlet, those are priestly colors. When you hear those, you should think priest. When Jesus tells the story about Lazarus who died, right, and he's talking to another man, and that man is wearing those colors, right? Jesus is probably condemning the temple system and the priesthood. It's like it's a representative of the whole priesthood system. The temple, the sacrificial system had become perverted, and it was going to be done away with. So those colors matter. But in Exodus 27, the contrast of the white linen surrounding, for the most part, the temple court, but then a gate on the east that is the priestly colors, right? Yeah. So it's just at the very most fundamental, level, you would say you come through a priestly gate. Yes. Right? Yeah. You have to come through a priestly gate. That's the most elementary, basic thing you can draw from that. But there's also the detail that the gate is on the east, and the location of the east is really important because this whole story started with all of humanity being kicked out of a gate on the east of Eden, right?
Yeah.
Eden is located at the top of a mountain from which rivers flow down.
Yep.
So what happens now when you have the tabernacle, not just as a representation of Sinai, which is also a mountain, but also the garden, the mountain garden that is up, and we were kicked out to the east, but now there's a priestly gate on the east through which we come back in. Well, that must mean that we're coming back to Eden.
Yep.
It's somehow, and that the tabernacle is in some way representative of Eden, that it's almost like it's a new Eden. And so new creation is also interwoven through all the stuff. Not to get too far ahead, but I was studying today on like the ordination of Aaron and his sons.
Yeah.
And before they can be priests, they have to go through a process. Before they can serve in the new creation zone, they have to go through a process which lasts 7 days.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So if you're going to serve in the new creation, you have to be
a new creation.
You have to go through a creation week. So, but if you're not paying attention to the east and the colors, you're going to miss all of that. But like
how richly that's portraying that.
Yeah. But it absolutely is portraying that. It's looking back to that garden and remembering that, there was an exile that took place because of sin, but God is coming back down and he's drawing people back in through the gate, which is a priestly gate, which, then you can start seeing the richness of the gospel in that text when you just, and all we're talking about is curtains and colors, right?
I know. I referred to that yesterday as they're like fabricated words, or they're words that are fabricated objects.
Yeah.
That's what's going on there with the tabernacle. You have these fabrications. Like we talk about sacraments often as being like words that you eat, or words that, like the baptism's a word that is seen, right?
You wear it.
You wear it. Yeah. But these are fabricated objects that are words that speak.
Yeah.
Right. And so, okay, so let's shift gears to the altar. There's some cool stuff going on with the altar.
Yeah.
So the first thing is that the altar is bronze. Like we've been introduced to some of these metals already. We have gold, silver, and bronze that come up in different times during the tabernacle construction. And what is unique about bronze?
Well, it's less valuable than silver or gold.
Yeah, it's less valuable than silver or gold, for sure.
Bronze represents like the earth.
Yeah.
The things that are bronze touch the earth in the tabernacle. So if you, what I've told people on Sundays is like, if you're a little bit of an artist, try drawing this stuff out, and then you start to notice patterns. So bronze is always low. Bronze touches the earth. Things that are earthy are bronze. The things that are elevated one step up are silver. And the things that are in a third zone, if you will. So you have a mimicking of the zones on Sinai, right?
Yeah.
There's the bottom where the people can assemble around. There's the middle where the priest can go. There's the top where Moses and Aaron is allowed to go as the priest mediator. You have those three zones also represented in the way people assemble in the altar, because only the high priest goes in, which is the top of the mountain. The priest can go into the holy space, which is the middle section, and then everybody else is in the outside. It's the same thing. So you have three different spaces represented by the three different materials. The closer you get to the ark, right, or the higher you go, if you want to, you're going in this way, but you can also think of it vertically in terms of space, that the closer you're getting to God, that's gold. The further you're getting from God, that's bronze, and silver is the in-between, which speaks both of value as well as location, right?
Yeah.
God's space is heaven, our space is earth, gold and bronze, right? And so when you're transversing from things that are made out of bronze to things that are made of silver, you are headed towards God's abode, if you will.
Yep. So there's a lot of reasons why bronze is interesting to represent Earth. One is that I think bronze is it's like a reddish metal, right? It's reddish. It's kind of got a red hue to it.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? It's kind of brownish reddish. And I'm
like Adam.
Like Adam, exactly. I was going to say the name for Adam is, related to the word for Edom, right? And Edom literally means red, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this, there's a lot of James Jordan in these episodes, which is good. Yeah. But one of the things that James Jordan says is that, Edom or Adam is named Adam because he's taken from the earth. And I don't know if you've ever been to one of those places. Like when I lived in the South, the earth is red. It is like you dig into the ground and it's like that. It's like a red clay kind of a hue. And it does kind of remind you of bronze, right? And so I believe all the bases for the poles that hold up the curtains are also bronze. And it's the first thing you access when you're going into the tabernacle is this bronze altar. I talked about this a little bit when we looked at Exodus 24, and how the altar functions like a door in a sense, because you have the same thing happening in Exodus 20, where altars are, or I think it's 20, Exodus 24, where altars are at the base and all the people can come to the altar, and and I believe that in that instruction, the altar is made of earth, right? I think that's in particular as an uncut stone, or it's made of earth, and so you have this earthy altar, and there's something that happens on that altar, and you mentioned it in the sermon, and it has to do with ascension. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the burnt offerings, the word actually is an offering of ascension, and when I was reading Calvin, he brought this up, that the word is funny for us because we know Olah is, being hello, which is kind of funny if you think about it. Hello. So that the Olah is the Hebrew for ascension. Yeah, right. And when a sacrifice is placed onto that altar, it is both consumed, it is given completely and fully to God, and then it ascends to God in a transposed form. So that would be through the form of the smoke, basically, from it being consumed. Yeah. So, which is really interesting because you typically only think of the sacrifices on the altar as killed, right? You think about the blood and the blood being splashed on the horns, and an atonement sacrifice, and all of that stuff that's all good and that's all true. But you also have this, both by title and imagery, this resurrection thing, this resurrection ascension thing, that there is a death that takes place for sin. And this is where you start seeing like types and shadows of a sacrifice being made on the altar for sin. But that sacrifice, because it's sacrificed, then ascends. It ascends into the heaven. So through smoke. So it's an ascension offering, which there's all sorts of like clues to that. Or in that, I should say.
The first time I had uncovered this Olah bit about the burnt offerings was I was studying. I think it was actually when I was going through Exodus with the youth, and I was studying Exodus 19, and then of course after Exodus 19 is Exodus 20. And in Exodus 19, though, you have it's like this. It's almost humorous because I think Moses goes up and down the mountain I don't know,
a bazillion times,
eight times, and it's got to be this old guy's got he's getting a hike. He's got a hike in, so he's there's all this talk about going up, going down, talking to them, going up, going down, talking to the people, and you have but in the middle of that, there's this firm instruction that you, Israel, cannot go up. You cannot go up. And the word used there for you cannot go up is you cannot Olah.
Olah.
You cannot Olah. And then later, after if you read 19 and 20 in relatively quick succession, and if you were looking at these words as connected, you would notice in Exodus 20, when God's giving the instruction about altars, he tells them explicitly, an altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings.
Yeah.
Right. And that word for burnt offerings you're going ups.
Yeah.
Right. So after all this instruction about you can't go up, but you can make an altar of earth and you can sacrifice it, you're going ups.
Yeah.
Right. And when you hear those things in succession, and that's what's going on with those words, you can see this gospel truth that you cannot go into the presence of God. You cannot go up, but through a sacrifice, you can go up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Jesus when he's talking about, I go to where I'm going, you cannot go. Right. Where I'm going, you cannot go. But I go there to prepare a place for you. And when I have done that, I will come back and take you with me. Right. And that's all just preached here in these to us esoteric laws about altars.
Yeah. You've got this situation set up where it's there's a problem that's constantly present, and it's God is in mercy and grace and love coming down to be with his people, right? So he's setting up tent, he's setting up his RV, right? And cool, what do you do when you set it up? Well, you invite everybody over, but you can't come over. Right. Yeah. And that's the tension. That's the tension under the old covenant. He's come down to be with you, and he's right next door, but you can't go in. Someone has to go in for you, and you can't go up, but somebody may go up for you.
Yeah.
That's the tension of it. And so you're waiting for that problem to be resolved in a different way. So the way it's resolved under the old covenant is through the priesthood that goes in for you, and the sacrifice that goes up for you. But those are all provisional and temporary and shadows of how this problem is ultimately going to be resolved. Someone's got to go in, someone's got to go up, but you can't do it.
You can't do it,
but somebody must. And it sets, and the whole thing gets set. Maybe we should end with this, but it gets set up for, okay, who's going to go in? And then so the next chapter, which we'll talk about after this, is, okay, now we're going to talk about priests.
Exactly.
Because they're going to go in. So
I think that's a good place to end it, because next time we'll talk about the priests.
Sounds great.
All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us and listening to Sermon B-Sides. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. See ya.
See ya.